Welcome. It's amazing to be here. This is an amazing conference. What is the best part of We Are Developers? Is it John Romero? Is it, there's really good coffee, I heard. And there's a lot of water around, which is great. I have two choices here. So the coffee and the water, I think, will be the best part of this conference. I don't even want that. This is, Sorry, would you like a sip? This is why the terrorists hate us. Stack Overflow, my shirt here, which says 10, that's from 10 years of Stack Overflow. It's actually about a year old. And Stack Overflow, we don't really measure the age of Stack Overflow in years. We measure it in how many times we have helped somebody get out of Vim that they ran by mistake, the Vim editor. So one of our number 3 questions is, how do I exit Vim? Does anybody, a lot of you I saw use Trello. Does anybody use Stack Overflow here? Can we, a few? Okay, hold on, keep them up. 1, 2, 3, no, keep them up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 10. That's sort of a stupid question now, and people laugh at me because it's sort of like saying, does anybody use Gravity? How many, raise your hand if you use Gravity. Anyone? Less, fewer of you. John, I have a much more important question. How many people in this room have answered a question on Stack Overflow? And you should stand up. Stand up. If you answered any question on Stack Overflow, please stand up. And can we have a round of applause, please, for the people that actually make Stack Overflow useful? I know it's not me. A lot of people focus on our number 1 user, John Skeet. You may have all heard that name. John Skeet has answered 35,000 questions on Stack Overflow. But there's like 14 million, so that's not even a lot. But because each question is visited by users who come from Google later, every question helps thousands of people. And when a question and answer on Stack Overflow helps you, it probably saves you about a half an hour. So we did this big mathematical calculation for John Skeet, and we said he's answered 35,000 questions. He has helped people 250 million times. And if you do a little calculation, the number of developers in the world, how many times he's helped people, each time it saved them about a half hour. Our calculation is that John Skeet personally has moved the entire world 6 hours into the future relative to where it would be if he hadn't been saving 250 million people all that time. I asked John Skeet, what question do you get when people meet you in person? And the question he always gets, it's a sort of silly joke. It's like, John Skeet, do you ever get Stack Overflows? And he's meaning, remember the error message, Stack Overflow? I'm sorry, maybe this isn't funny if you're too young. So first of all, I'm here to report that not only does John Skeet not get Stack Overflows, but John Skeet can divide by 0. That's how good he is. All right. Let me talk, I'll switch to the past of Stack Overflow, and I want to talk a little bit about the future of Stack Overflow and where we see things going in the future. If you think about how you use Stack Overflow today, not a lot of people ask questions on Stack Overflow because the answer is already there. And the answers that are there are only there on topics that a lot of people are having trouble with. So compilers, programming languages, and libraries that are well known and widely used, you will find answers on Stack Overflow, and it will help you a lot there. And the future of Stack Overflow really is thinking about all the questions that are not on Stack Overflow. And the reason they're not there is because they're not about a compiler or a language that you use every day. They are there for their proprietary questions that you have. So almost everybody, I mean, unless you're a beginner or an independent software developer, almost everybody is working on a team, and they're working with code from other people that they did not write. And who wrote that code? Well, kind of lots of people, and some of them may be right next to you. And I guess you could ask them one more time to help you interface with their code or understand their code or debug their code. But realistically, some of those people may be long gone, and you may be in a company working on a code base that's 20 years old that has sort of what we like to call the lava flow pattern, the lava flow pattern is if you think of a volcano, it makes lava. And the lava gets hard, turns into rocks, and then more lava comes out and it piles up on top of that, and more lava piles on top of that. So that's what a code base looks like. There's things down in the bottom which are rock solid and you can't touch them. Everybody's afraid of them. And why are they afraid of that code? Nobody ever edits that code or modifies that code because nobody knows how it works or how it's supposed to work or why it works or how to change it. And so what they do is they just sort of build things on top. And so I think probably the average thing, today I tried to buy a ticket for the Berlin, train, whatever, and the user interface was very, very slow and kind of embarrassing. So if you wrote the user interface for selling tickets to the Berlin trains, maybe you should just leave because this is going to be bad. But I kind of wonder, what is going on there? Why does you can press the cancel button and it takes like 30 seconds? Why is that going on? Probably because of lava flow. How does lava flow work? Well, in 1956, we had to build a system. And it was a very simple database, and relational database hadn't been invented yet. So we went to IBM, and we bought a $5 million mainframe computer, and we wrote code in an old version of COBOL, and that's still running. But nobody knows COBOL anymore. And in order to keep that code running, we have to keep going back to IBM and buying. They still sell mainframes. It's weird. But nobody knows how to do that. But fortunately, a long time ago, somebody wrote a better user interface to that code using the IBM Kix screen interface, 25 lines of 80 characters, the thing you still see at the airport. And somebody created that thing so that we would have a better user interface than punch cards. And that is still running, but nobody really knew how to change the underlying code, which is in COBOL. So the next thing that happened is that somebody got a Windows system, and they ran a terminal emulator, a TN3270 terminal emulator that could emulate that thing, and they programmed it using Windows messages, which is very awkward, to send keystrokes and screen scrape out of that particular thing. And then later, somebody thought the Windows messages were too complicated, so they created a Visual Basic 3.0 app which sends the messages and then receives a screen scrape thing. And so now there's a Visual Basic app that can talk to the mainframe computer via screen scraping. And at some point, nobody wanted to use Visual Basic anymore, and Java was becoming popular. So somebody wrote a Java program that launched a virtual machine that runs a copy of Visual Basic 3.0, because we lost the compiled executable, so we still have to run it in the compiler. It's interpreted mode, but it's OK. And so we're running a 3270 in the virtual machine on a headless server in a whatever, with a Java thing that's running some kind of Java Beans thing that allows us to send messages and get messages, which are just inserting rows in a database on a mainframe somewhere. But wait, nobody likes Java anymore. So we went to microservices. And what we did is we created a microservice that talks to a Java thing through a user interface with a RESTful interface, because that's the cool thing now. And so now we have a node thing running on another headless server. Anyway, that's the lava flow of development. And what's going on here is you're afraid of that code at the bottom. Nobody knows what those 5 layers are. Nobody knows how they work. Nobody can reproduce them. And only bad things can come from that. And the reason that you're afraid of that code is because it's not documented. Now, let's talk about documentation for a while. The only failed thing that Stack Overflow ever did, well, now there were a few things. Now I'm thinking of all the failed things we did. Sorry. One of the only failures of Stack Overflow is we thought, hey, you guys like answering questions, right? Why don't we make Stack Overflow documentation? We'll make a place on Stack Overflow where you can read and write documentation. And I think the lesson we learned from that is that documentation is stupid. Nobody wants to write documentation. Nobody wants to read documentation. No documentation that has ever been written is good. Nobody that has ever read documentation has understood it. And once documentation is written, it gets put in Confluence somewhere where nobody changes it, which is weird because that's the whole point. And it's just a waste of time. So can we all please just agree to forget about the documentation? Thank you. Are we in favor of that or not? The point of Stack Overflow, which we've learned over the years, 10 years ago, before Stack Overflow, how did you learn how to program? You went to the bookstore, they had a wall of books about Java, and you picked the one that was fattest, and you took it home, and you read it all, and now you knew how to code in Java. Today, if you went to the bookstore to try to find a book about the equivalent of Java today is Rust, like the new hot language, there's no books about that. There's 2, but they don't have them in the bookstore, and that's not how you learn. The way you learn is you just type. And then you have a problem, and then you go to Stack Overflow, and then there's already an answer there. And so what's going on here is that we've replaced documentation, which never worked and never made anybody happy and was never right, and we've replaced that with page faulted in knowledge in the form of questions and answers. And so that's actually useful knowledge for a couple of reasons. It gets generated correctly. In other words, rather than trying to figure out every question that somebody's going to have and writing documentation in advance for an imaginary reader, the only thing you write down, the only thing you document, is an answer to a question that an actual person is actually having right now because they actually want to know something. So it's almost like you page fault in the documentation by answering the questions that come up. And also, you don't have to keep writing after you're done. You just stop as soon as you've answered their question. But also, because there's a real person there, if your answer is not good, they will say, I'm sorry, I still don't understand, and you won't get the check mark and the upvote in Stack Overflow. And so that particular method of creating all your documentation ad hoc, on the fly, building up a cache of documentation, as you go along, actually what it leaves behind is a very, very useful thing that is just the perfect amount of documentation that you need to answer actual questions that the people are having today and that future programmers on your team will have when they came back. So I think the point of that story really is what we've been working on at Stack Overflow in the last 3 years. And we've been introducing different versions of this, but we now have a way for everybody to get a version of Stack Overflow for their team. There's a small version. It's called Stack Overflow for Teams, and you can sign up on our website. There's a medium version called Stack Overflow for Business, and it's for larger companies of maybe 500 developers, et cetera. And the large version is called Stack Overflow Enterprise, and that's like the biggest companies in the world, and we've already got about 35 of them signed up that have literally thousands of developers. I mean, companies like Microsoft. And then they provide access to developers, to all the developers within a company to ask questions on internal topics. And so far, everybody's been very, very excited about this. And this is really kind of where the future is. A lot of people who never typed a word on Stack Overflow because we already had all the answers, now that they can ask questions and answer questions about their internal code that's proprietary, have become much more active on Stack Overflow. And I think we just get everybody to admit that that documentation is a waste of time, and that the real way to do things is with these sort of different Stack Overflow for Teams products, using Stack Overflow on your team to answer questions. So that's the future. There's a couple of things I kind of like to talk about every time I get a big audience. A little bit of maybe the philosophy of Stack Overflow, which I think is important. And there's so many people here have contributed to Stack Overflow that I'm sure many of you know it, but it might be worth a refresher. So I want to start out with the fact, kind of the central premise of Stack Overflow is that it is very, very hard to make a thing that you put on the internet and everybody uses it, and then you allow people to communicate among themselves. So that could be Stack Overflow, it could be a social network, it could just be the App Store where people write ratings. You always get, let's just say, unintended consequences. And the behavior of large groups of people online where they're all free to type things. I mean, the average person just assumes that if there's a box, a multi-line text box on the internet, that they have a God-given, inalienable right given to them by the United Nations to type whatever garbage they want into that box and then submit it. And not only that, but if it doesn't then remain on the internet until the heat death of the universe, then they have personally been censored, and then this is a kind of a horrible thing. So it's very hard to get people to behave on the internet, and the consequences of that have started to become very severe, as we have seen with Facebook, and I don't even have to tell that story because it's boring, because you all know what I'm talking about. A friend of mine first encountered this with the Apple App Store, where anybody can kind of write any comment that they want on the App Store. And this was in the very early days of the App Store, and Apple had come up with a way to create, to allow developers to write apps for the iPhone. And he thought, this is fun, I'm going to make an app. And his first app was called Ruler Phone, and this was his idea in the days before AR. He wanted it to be possible to measure things, measure the length of things using your iPhone. And all he had was the camera. So this was his idea. You take out your credit card from your wallet. Everybody has a credit card in their pocket. You hold it up next to the item that you want to measure. You take a picture with your camera, and his app, Ruler Phone, knows how long a credit card is because they're all the same length. And they're all exactly the same size. And so you could then figure out how long the other things in that picture were based on the length. Anyway, it's a fun little app. It was pretty easy. He was selling it for the minimum price, like $1, 99 cents, whatever. And he was making, actually, good money. He was making like $1,000 a month or something, and plus whatever he could charge on the credit cards. But the trouble was, the reviews that he got didn't make any sense. And he just sort of thought, oh, these are customers using it. But the reviews were just whatever anybody wanted to write. And so some people would say, I don't have a credit card. It's like, all right. So like 1 star. It's like, I don't know if that's my fault, but okay. Some of them like made no sense at all. And my favorite review was somebody who wrote, worst game ever. With 3 periods. So I've had a hobby lately. Once a year on the anniversary of worst game ever, I go find some app like Uber, and I write a review like, I couldn't figure out how to play this game at all. I was only able to kill 3 of the cars. I don't even know how to get to level 2. Okay, so you start with this crazy system where everybody's typing whatever words they want on the internet, and we're trying to get something useful out of it that doesn't involve the Russians hacking the American election. I mean, that doesn't involve, I don't know, like all kinds of devastation and horrible things happening. And that involves creating rules. And at first you might think the rules are going to be easy and obvious. Let's just say, how about nothing illegal? And then you have to think about what country you're in, and different things are illegal in different countries. And some of these things are sort of very, very, very interesting. And so there's categories like denying that the Holocaust ever occurred, categories of speech which are against the law in 16 different democracies, including Germany, but are legal in many other democracies, including the United States. And now you got to figure out what the heck to do with an international audience. But that's not even the problem. If you think that your problem is figuring out what kind of speech to allow, what kind of speech not to allow, boy, you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. Because the next level is trying to figure out how to shape the behavior of that large community of people. And I say shape because it's very light. It's not forcing everybody to do it exactly right. It's just shaping it to get positive outcomes so that the people are contributing in some way to something useful that you want to create. In the case of Stack Overflow, for example, we started out saying, this is not going to be a place where one person comes and gets an answer from 2 people. This is going to be a place where one person comes, gets an answer from 2 people, and then they leave behind a thing on the internet that is useful to 1,000 people with the votes and all that kind of stuff. So all the early decisions about this design of Stack Overflow, including a lot of weird things that are on there, are specifically designed to make it so that 1,000 people can get the most benefit out of Stack Overflow. And a lot of you know this, and you probably all heard it because we've been talking about it for 11 years now. But that's not obvious. And so that's the most important part here, is that a newcomer, a new programmer, an 18-year-old walks up to Stack Overflow and starts looking at it, and what they see is questions and answers, and they must assume, this is a service that exists to serve the people asking questions, and assume that that's kind of what's important. And then they go on and they ask their question, which is either maybe cutting and pasting a homework assignment that they got in a class, or cutting and pasting a programming assignment that they got at their job, or asking a general question like, how do I write a program to measure? Or something like that, a question that can't really be answered. There's certain categories of things then that we just have to ban them, and we can't allow them. And so we're trying to create certain simple rules that we have learned will allow this large group of people, millions of people coming together every month on Stack Overflow, to actually create something useful that creates an artifact that's useful, and to kind of harness the power of the community to make something that no single one of us could actually make, and that's really, really valuable and moves the whole world into the future faster. And you have to figure out the rules. And the rules that you figure out are sometimes kind of tricky. They're sort of tricky. I'll give you, I want to just give you a random example from real life, which is, is anybody into techno music? I'm sorry, it's Berlin. I have to ask. Techno? Anything? Not so many. Okay, so the good techno clubs, the bad techno clubs, you know that they're bad because there's Instagram, and there's like girls doing this, right? And the good techno clubs either take away your phone or they have a rule against phones. And people don't even understand why that. Like, why is that a rule? Why do you have to have it? Why can't I have my phone? I got my phone everywhere. I take my phone to every other tourist attraction. Whenever I'm having fun, my first instinct is to stop having fun and to show all my friends on Instagram that I'm having fun. That is more important. Then I can prove that I was having fun because I'm not sure if I'm having fun. And the clubs have figured out, the good ones, the good clubs have figured out, the way to have fun is to put your fucking phone away and just have fun. And then they ban the phones. And that's fine, but most people show up at those clubs with their phones, and they don't understand. Nobody has explained to them you're going to have fun if you stop trying to brag to your friends and make a permanent record of whatever, the feeling that you're feeling right now, which, by the way, MDMA is not transmitted on Instagram, so you will not actually communicate how much fun you're having to your other friends, although you might think you are. But those particular experiences, like the clubs have sort of figured out, look, just put away your phone. You're going to have a better time. It's going to force you to go talk to somebody who is there rather than texting with somebody who is in Los Angeles right now and asleep because of the time zone difference. That's a non-obvious rule. That's an example of something that if you do it, people will have more fun. The experience will be better. Similarly, on Stack Overflow, there are some non-obvious rules. I'm going to give you a simple one, and I'll give you two complicated ones. The simple one is we have a rule: do not ask a question that the correct answer would be the length of a book. So, and there's complicated reasons for that, but you don't have to know. Just don't do it. And so people will go on and say, I'm trying to learn programming. What should I do? People will go on and say, how do I write a program to do something broad? This is like, literally, this is like, I think I'm having some pain in my abdomen. You're a doctor. How can I remove my abdomen? And then the only thing a reasonable doctor would say is, have you been to medical school? Because, all right, let's start with going to medical school. And you're like, shut up, that's 7 years. Just tell me the steps to remove my abdomen. And it's like kind of insulting to the doctor, because like you have to learn like a whole bunch of stuff before you should even be cutting open your own, wait a minute, never mind. Like the question doesn't make sense. And the correct answer is beyond a book, it's an advanced degree in a university, and then 7 years of practice in hospitals. And then maybe you'll do a pretty good job with that. On the whole. And you see those questions on Stack Overflow all the time, and we just don't allow them because there's no possible answer that can ever benefit anybody. And so, like, go away. But this is non-obvious to people because they think this is a place where I can ask questions, and they don't know that that's not a question that they can ask. And when they ask it, they get very sad because we have to be mean to them and tell them, go away, your question is not awesome. And they're like, why? And I go, well, we have a rule that you can't ask questions that the length of the answer would be a book. And they're like, well, I don't like that rule. That's not my favorite rule. Like, my favorite rule would be, and then they just start imagining things, and you're like, just listen, just come back in a year or something when you know why you're an idiot. But this is not very welcoming. And I will come back to that idea of being welcoming, but we can't have that question on there. It's not going to help anyone. There's two much better versions of this, which I'll go into a little bit in depth. Sometimes I'll be speaking to a group of students, and they'll say you have 7 minutes because it's like a hackathon or something, and they're all tired, and they've been awake for 48 hours, and they smell badly. And they're like, Joel Spolsky will speak at the end of the hackathon, and I got 7 minutes. So here's what I try to cram in that every student needs to know when they learn programming. These are sort of the two things you need to know. Number one, I like to call rubber duck debugging. Rubber duck debugging is when you take a rubber duck from the bathtub, squeak, and you put it on top of the monitor, you bounce it on the monitor, and before you try anything, when you have a bug, you explain it to the duck. And you say, okay, I'm trying to do this, and then I did that, and you just sort of recite the experience of the bug. And the reason this absurd, and it doesn't have to be a duck, and you knew that, right? It could be like a little devil or something cute. The reason this works a lot of the time is that just the very act of trying to put into words, what are you doing? What did you try to do? What do you want to happen? What did you do? And then what did you expect would happen? And then, important, what happened instead? Those components, what you want, what you did, what you expected, and what happened instead. Those are the components that you kind of need, and if you can explain those clearly to a duck, a lot of times you've explained them to yourself, and then you say, oh shit, I'm stupid, and you fix your bug. And programmers want you to do this before you go on Stack Overflow and start typing words. And the reason we want you to do this is because it's really helpful. 90% of the time, you solve your problem by being able to explain it to people very, very clearly. So the rule on Stack Overflow in general, and it's sort of a and it's not like listed as a rule, you will be banned if you don't do this. But what we're trying to teach everybody to do, and what we encourage everybody to do, is to include those components. What did you do? What did you expect? What did you want? What did you get instead? If you include those components, and you explain them clearly in a way that a rubber duck could understand, then we can help you. We really can. Those questions get 100% get answers. 100%, like in seconds. If you leave out any part of that, you don't get an answer. And you don't get an answer because we don't know. Like you said, okay, I want this, I did this, and I got this. And it's like, okay, that's what you should get. I don't even understand the question. You're like, oh, no, I expected this. Aha. You have to include that part. Or, I want this, I got that. Well, what did you do? You could be doing anything. I don't know what you're doing wrong. I can't help you. Sometimes the question is, can anybody here help me? Like you've left out all 4 parts. That is reasonable if you walk into a coffee shop, I guess, and you're just opening the conversation and you expect later to provide the other parts. But on Stack Overflow, hey, it's the internet. We don't have time. Let's not waste time. Just go ask your question, include all 4 parts. That's what we want to teach you. And the reason we want to teach you this is because this is the basic skill that a programmer should have learned by the time they're 18. And so that's one of them. And that's one of these funny rules, which is like, I went on Stack Overflow and I asked a question and people were mean to me. And half the time it's because you left out one of those things. There's another rule on Stack Overflow. You've probably heard it expressed thusly. The rule is always include a sample of code, the shortest possible sample of code that illustrates your problem. Don't give us the whole code. People in the old days would upload zip files. They're like, here's my code base. Debug this for me. Why are we telling you that? It's not because we're mean. It's not because we don't have an unzipper app on our computer. We don't want to download your source code, compile it, and try to figure out what the heck is going on. It's because there's a style of debugging that's called divide and conquer. How does that work? You take your million lines of code, which are not working correctly, and you sort of say, I wonder if the problem is in this 500,000 lines or in that 500,000 lines. And so you put a print statement in between those 500,000 lines, and you try to see everything up to here is exactly as I expected, and if it's not, then the bug is not down here, it's up here. And now you take these 500,000 lines of code and you put a print right in the middle, and now you know, now you've narrowed it down to 250,000 lines of code, and thanks to the benefit of logarithms, in about 8 times, even for the largest code bases, you'll eventually get down to a line of code, and before that line, everything is working perfectly, and after that line, everything is not working perfectly, and now you know where your problem is. And in fact, 9 times out of 10, this is how you debug as a programmer, which is why printf debugging is often all you really need. And a lot of developers have never really used any other form of debugging. There's probably 99% of the time, that's the only kind of debugging I've ever used. And I've lately been using Arduino, where you can't even print, so it's even worse. It's like LED blink debugging. But that's kind of all you need to do binary. And when you're looking at one line of code and you're saying to us, I thought this would do this, and it actually did that, most of the time you figure it out. That solves your problem. You're like, oh, this is a minus, that should be a plus. I forgot about the commutative property of multiplication, or whatever it is. And you solve your problem. And if you still haven't, take that line and then put it on Stack Overflow, and we will help figure out what is broken in your brain, what you thought about the world and the way that like maybe multiplication and addition interact, and show you where to put the parentheses. And then you'll be like, oh, now I remember why I should have read that chapter on the priority of operators and all that kind of stuff. So here's 2 big systems of programming that are enormously useful: rubber ducky debugging, and that became a Stack Overflow rule, which was include all the components that you need and explain it to somebody that doesn't understand what's in your head, to a duck. Number 2, divide and conquer. Show us the minimum amount of code. And the reason we're telling you to do this is because this is beginning programming. And if you learn those 2 skills, you won't need Stack Overflow that much. And you'll be a good developer, and you'll be able to solve every problem that comes your way, including, by the way, an awful lot of problems involving physical manufacturing of things and working in your garage on your car and all kinds of other problems that you may encounter. So we just want to make sure that you've learned those. And also, if those don't solve your problem, we can help you. That's what Stack Overflow is built for. And so we created these 2 rules, but they're weird. They're not the rules that people expect. In fact, in society, if you're interacting with a human being, you expect that you have to ask permission to ask a question. So the first thing you say to a person if you have a question face-to-face is, can I ask you a question? Do you have a few minutes? But please don't do that on Stack Overflow, because that doesn't make any sense. And that's what I meant about the rules not being obvious. People still, we still have a problem with people thinking they're special and they're snowflakes. They don't want to obey our rules. But there's nothing we can really do about that. So let's get on to the last thing, which is something that I implied, and it's sort of what follows from this principle that on Stack Overflow, we have some rules. The rules are not obvious. They're not your favorite rules. You don't want to do that rule. You don't like that rule. But there's a reason that rule is there. And in fact, the reason that rule is there is why everybody is enjoying themselves at this club place. Everybody's getting answers on Stack Overflow. The whole world is moving into the future due to Stack Overflow. We got the wacko little rules. And we could just say, look, shove off, dude. We don't really care. But we want to be more welcoming to people. And let me talk about why. And the reason I want to talk about why is something you may have noticed, and it probably came as a surprise to you all. But many of the people that I see in this room are of the male sex. I don't know if you noticed that. You look around and say, oh, yeah, I did notice that. That's weird. Why is that the case? And in fact, this is an attribute of the current world of tech and some other worlds too, construction, whatever. Why is it important for tech, and why do we even care? I mean, maybe this is what people want to do. There's not a lot of men who teach third grade ballet, but, maybe they don't want to. The reason this is a problem for tech is, again, going back to my motto and our motto at Stack Overflow, which is developers are writing the script for the future. What do I mean by that? The script for the future, the code that you write is going to run in the future. And the code that you write is going to be important because somebody standing at the train platform in Berlin is going to be interacting with your code and thinking that guy's an idiot and going to be missing their train because you have a cancel button that takes 25 seconds. And it looked like it was green, so it looked like it meant okay because I don't speak German. Anyway, something about the world is going to change. I'm going to get where I'm going 7 minutes late, multiplied by 1 million people who ride the U-Bahn are going to all have that situation because there's some code that you write that ran in the future. That is the script for the future. That's a very, very small example. I touched upon the Russians hacking the American election. We could go to sort of a ton of different things. And almost every speaker that is speaking at this conference, the reason they're speaking at this conference is because they wrote some code that changed the future, that changed the world as it exists today. Whether it's John Romero or anybody in a small way or in a large way or in a huge way, I have probably, as much as Stack Overflow moved the world forward because of Quake, I personally am 1 year behind in my life where I would have been if it wasn't for that game. I think that's okay. The world has changed. You change the world, and that's what developers are doing. And it's really, really important to consider, like, how important is that? How often is your life being changed because of a law that a legislator passed in a democratic way, in a democratic country, hopefully, for those of you that are lucky enough to live in one, that went through a whole thoughtful process about what should the law be and a process of negotiations. And okay, we've decided the laws. And when does that affect you? I don't know, when you pay your taxes, when you're trying to open a bar, once in a while. A developer makes a decision, and those decisions impact your daily life about whether you can spend your time playing with Quake or you have to wait for the next train or whatever it is. Those things hit you 38 times before breakfast. Hundreds of times a day, because you're walking around with a little computer program, a lot of computer programs written by a lot of developers, and it is telling you where to go and where to stand, and Google's telling you how to walk and how to cross the street, and all of this kind of stuff, and everything is being influenced by code written by developers. So this is, not only is it super important, but the code written by developers is probably more important than the code written by governments. And that's tough, and that's kind of interesting, because who's writing it? Were they elected? No. Do they represent the world in an equitable way? Not really. It's kind of the people that enjoyed engineering school and didn't feel. So this is why it's a problem. This is why it's a problem, is that the work done by developers, super important, super valuable, and therefore it should be created by the world at large, not by a particular demographic slice of the world. Why is this happening? Is there anything we can do about it? There's a lot of things that we can do about it, and I'm going to focus literally on one, and that comes down to an experience I had when I went to a One Direction concert. Do they have One Direction? Have you heard of One Direction? I know, you're very young. It's a boy band, and like Zayn Malik, you know him, right? Okay. Harry Styles. For some reason, I am gay, but I am also a huge One Direction fan. And I wanted to go to a One Direction concert with my other gay friends. And I live in New York City, which has a lot of gay people, but the concert in New York City was sold out. So we decided to go down to Philadelphia, where there was another concert the next day. Took a car, drove to Philadelphia, went to the concert. Not so many gay people. And in fact, the audience, it was a huge arena, like a stadium, a football stadium, American football, much bigger, right? Giant stadium, 100,000 people, 99,997 teenage girls, and then me and my other two gay friends. So I felt a little awkward. And here's something I want to say. I have to say, it was a good concert. There were a few other men there, but they were daddies. Like, not the good kind of, fathers of the, sorry. So me and my two friends were the only guys standing up throughout the whole concert. The rest of the men were sitting down, doing email on their phones. And I had a lot of fun. And nobody, at no point in the course of this entire concert, coming in, intermission, before, after, did anybody ever say anything odd like, "What are you doing here?" or mean, or even remotely give me the feeling that I shouldn't be there. There was absolutely zero of that. The teenage girls know who their allies are. So, but how did I feel at that concert? When I left, I felt, you know what? I'm probably not going to go back to another One Direction concert. As much as I enjoyed it, I could not help the feeling that I was in the wrong place for 2 hours. And the reason that I felt that I was in the wrong place is, even though nobody told me I was in the wrong place, I could just look around and see that I was in the wrong place. And I didn't feel unwelcome, but that's not enough. I didn't feel positively welcomed. And honestly, if one teenage girl had said to me, "It is so awesome that you are proud of liking One Direction. I like One Direction too. What's your favorite song?" then I would have felt welcome. And I probably would have come back. And I would have been like, okay, this is okay. I can see myself belonging here. And I think we have the same thing on Stack Overflow. We have the same exact syndrome on Stack Overflow. So kind of pay attention to it, which is that when girls who are learning how to program have questions and they look around and they start going on Stack Overflow and asking questions, what they see is a lot of people that don't look like them. And so nobody has to be mean to them or ask them for a date or do something obnoxious. Like, that doesn't even happen for a lot of girls to feel like, it's going to take work for me just to exist in this community. And obviously the same applies to minorities and underrepresented groups in programming. You kind of look around, nobody looks like you. Unless they are actively welcoming, you have to kind of like overcome a lot of friction every single day to stay in the field. One woman programmer told me that she asked a question on Stack Overflow. She'd been having a problem coding, and as she was learning how to code, she'd been having a problem with a particular thing, and she had worked on it for a whole day, and finally somebody told her, "Why don't you ask on Stack Overflow?" And so she composed a question on Stack Overflow, which was perfect, great question. Somebody wrote an answer, perfect, great answer, but the answer that they wrote, he started with the words, "Oh, this is easy. This is easy." That's not a negative thing. That's not mean. I didn't say you were dumb. I'm just saying, oh, cool, easy. All you have to do is, and what she thought when she read this was, no, it's not. That is not easy. It is not easy for me. I've been working on this for 6 hours. I still don't understand it. I don't understand your answer. None of this makes any sense. And so the conclusion that she drew was, programming is not for me. A lot of guys here, I'm a woman, they all say this is easy. It is not easy. You're drawing a conclusion here. All you got to do is change the words on that sentence. Just change the words in the answer. Instead of saying this is easy, you could say, "I'm glad you asked. This is hard. This is tricky." Not a lot of people are able to immediately figure out that. That's all you got to do. And now what happens? The thing is flipped. The behavior is sort of flipped. And so all this kind of stuff that I'm talking about is a part of being actively welcoming to newcomers to the programming field, whoever they may be, whatever race, gender, sexual orientation, or background, or country, or whatever that they come from. Not Dutch. Don't touch the Dutch. You can be mean to them all you want. But everybody else, being actively welcoming and actively sort of considerate of, like, how would I feel if this is my little sister, my little brother, my dad is trying to learn how to program. How would you answer? What would be the respectful, welcoming, kind way to answer there? And that's really what we're going for with Stack Overflow. And I personally believe that if we can do this on Stack Overflow, just flip from, "Oh, this is easy," to, "I see why you're having trouble. Thank you for asking." Just flip to being from not welcoming to welcoming, we can probably make a huge difference over time, a huge difference to the makeup of who is writing the script for the future. And if all goes well, I hope that what we can do then is create a much more diverse community of people creating the script for the future that will be far more helpful and sympathetic of people trying to buy tickets on the train who don't speak German and keep pressing cancel by mistake. So that is my goal for Stack Overflow. To summarize, 2 big things for the future. Personal questions, Stack Overflow for teams, private questions, all that kind of stuff. Number 2, and we're going to be working on this very hard. We have a project internally called the Welcome Wagon. How can we turn around the attitude on Stack Overflow? So it's still important that when you ask questions that you follow the rules. And they're weird, not obvious rules, but we're sympathetic, and we welcome you, and we want to help you. Thank you very much.